Few things in life are certain, but primarily death and taxes is one that many of us agree we will definitely have to deal with. But the conversation on taxation across the African continent is one that often runs into obstacles. Various issues have impeded the realization of the collected tax targets across the African continent. Now, comparatively, most African governments are able to collect about 15% of their GDP in taxes against the 40% that is being collected by European, Asian, and North American countries. But given the massive demands of developing African countries, this low level of massive tax collection jeopardizes the African continent's socio-economic developmental progress. Low taxes generated and collected by these economies are partly attributable to the underdevelopment of African countries' tax management systems. These inefficiencies are also impeding efficient tax collection and management. But there have been reforms across tax systems across the continent, but there's still much work to be done. And that's why New Central is partnering with the West African Tax Administration Forum to highlight the role taxes play in Africa's economic development, how to best put taxes to use, and what needs to be done to overcome the continent's tax challenges. Joining me now is Babatunde Oladapo. He's the Executive Secretary of the West African Tax Administration Forum. Babatunde, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Tolulope, for having me.
And as I said earlier, we'll have a special announcement, but that will come towards the end of this conversation. So let's start with looking at some of the challenges we've seen that involve taxation across the continent. While there has been significant reform, it simply seems to not have been enough. What would you say the main challenges have been?
Yeah, basically the main challenges, the challenges are many, but then let's situate it in the context of what is happening around us. Now there's an upsurge in the use of technology by businesses, and that poses challenges for tax administrations. Businesses are moving away from the traditional model of brick and mortar. So tax administrations are also will up the game in terms of involving technology and being able to track and tax transactions that occur online. You will agree with me now. The world has no border. Someone can be in the States and be offering service here. Likewise, in Africa, you can be offering service. So those are challenge. The challenge of digitizing tax administration is a key one, and then also the low tax morale. It's a big one for tax administrations in Africa. The level of payment of taxes, especially the formal one, are actually not reflective of the situation on ground. Corporate organizations, the big ones, multinational enterprises, are not actually paying their fair taxes. High network individuals who use multiple means to evade paying taxes. Most of the people that pay taxes, and the taxes are not even that consequential, are the informal sector, people who operate at the level of, you see, commercial boards, driver, schools, those people that some informal tax collectors will grab by the roadside, forced to pay certain levy or the other. So we have that low morale in terms of payment of taxes, which African governments will need to work seriously. And there's a moral question tied around it. A lot of questions are being asked. When you pay taxes, do you actually get value for the taxes paid? Those are questions hanging in the balance that tax administrations are working with other arms of government to ensure that there's a whole of government approach to tax administration and revenue mobilization.
Okay, Babatunde, let me come in here. Let me come in here because of time. I want to get to some other areas. You talked about, of course, the informal sector, but beyond the informal sector, there's the small businesses, which we know are the backbone of many African economies. But these businesses have continued to flag the issue of multiple taxes or multiple taxation. We can use Nigeria as an example, federal, state, and local government taxes that seem to be strangling businesses or the ability of small businesses to really grow. What do you think about the impact of these multiple taxes on the economies of the countries around the continent?
Yeah, I tell you, it has been stifling the kind of growth we expect in Africa. There should be more regulation. And if the truth be told, if you examine the plethora of taxes being paid by those in the informal sector, or less those small businesses, you find out they actually cannot be categorized as taxes. Some of them are levies, some of them are rates, and you will find it at the end of the day, sometimes even the money doesn't get to the appropriate authorities like the local government or the subnational tax authority. So it, for a fact, stifling growth potentials, and government needs to do more in terms of harmonizing these taxes, levies, or rate, so that it can bring about a kind of certainty. For instance, if I'm operating a small business, I should be able to know with specifically, this is the type of taxes I need to pay. And thankfully, in Nigeria and some other countries, some new things are happening. I know there's a threshold in Nigeria for small businesses. If you have less than 25 million naira, you are called corporate taxes. And it seems at the national level in most African countries, taxation is well organized, but lower than when you get to subnational, that's where you actually have issues. And that's where the shoe actually pinches. So you find out that the low-income earner needs to pay taxes that most times don't go to government, and they become nuisance taxes. And we hope and trust that with the growing need for African government to raise more revenue, especially on the back of the COVID-19 and other economic downturn globally, there will be more focus to make sure that small businesses are creating space to actually become the multinationals of tomorrow.
So I want to piggyback off of this because we often hear about widening the tax net and also deepening it as well, widening the tax net in order to bring in more of Africa's informal economy. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of people paying taxes to people who are not necessarily agents of the state, or that taxes that they're paying don't necessarily make it into government coffers at different levels. But when we look at the situation we find across many African countries coming out of COVID-19, let's situate this now. Coming out of COVID-19, having to deal with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, more people, particularly in a country like Nigeria, millions more people have moved into poverty. We have issues with our currencies right now. So how do you continue to sort of have these conversations or even make the move to reform and restructure tax administration systems without burdening populations that are already burdened?
Okay, yeah, there's a pressing need, I agreed, for African governments to raise revenue. And also, it's very important that you don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Globally, there is a trend that is going called cooperative compliance. Without taxpayers, without citizens, government will not be able to raise taxes. So the first place to start is widening the conversation base, just like what we are doing here, engaging citizens to find out and define the relationship between those who are being taxed and those who are doing the taxation. And then to begin to look at how do we make taxation to wear a human face? How do we make taxation to promote growth? How do we make taxation to be the bedrock of building businesses that will go the long distance? So it's not so much about the figures collected at this point. It should be the building block of a more sustaining conversation between government and citizens. Because when we look beyond, earlier we were quoting statistics, the average OECD countries, you find out that 33.5, that's just the average. Some do 50 above. And then even Latin American country, you see 21.9. But here in Africa, we have 16.0. And we need to move away from the way tax administration is being done to engaging citizens, citizen engagement, so that the people at the lower rung of the ladder will be involved. And then also the well-to-do, like the high net worth individuals who are not actually paying enough taxes, the taxes they are meant to pay, the multinationals who are using aggressive tax planning to erode the tax basis can be brought on the table and effectively taxed.
Okay, so let's talk about the work that the West African Tax Administration Forum is doing to improve revenue mobilization in your member states. Just briefly take us through that because of time.
Yeah, so one of the things we have identified with tax administration, there's a need for capacity building, and that's an area that WATAF has been fully engaged. We provide trainings for our members, like on the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, has tax implication. If you're going to lower tariff or remove tariffs completely, it means you are losing customs revenue. So it means we have to talk about what the taxman can do. We had a workshop recently in Lometogo on that to prepare our members. What do they need to do? There will be needs to talk about tax policy change, tax law being changed, and then also the issue of digitalization. We have been encouraging our members and organizing peer learning sessions to enable them come to terms with modern way of carrying out tax administration processes. So majorly, WATAF facilitates capacity building. We also arrange peer learning opportunities for our members, not only to learn from their peers in West Africa or Africa. We also provide linkages to others beyond Africa so that we will have enough capacity to tax citizens and corporates in our jurisdiction. And also, WATAF also provide a melting point for ventilating the aspiration of tax administration. Before WATAF, what we had was a loose arrangement where all the countries in West Africa will go their way along linguistic line. That's the Francophone, the Anglophone, and the Lusophone. But with WATAF, we've been able to give a voice to tax administration needs at important fora like the UN, the Organization for Economic Development, the OECD, who are those who are shaping the global tax rules. So WATAF has been playing that role to make sure that, especially in West Africa, our desires and needs are taken into consideration when the global tax rules are being formulated. These are among the many works that we've been doing at WATAF.
All right, Babatunde, Oladapo, thank you so much for joining me. And I'll just use this opportunity to let our audience know that New Central is now partnering with WATAF in order to bring the issues around taxation to the fore. So you will be able to hear more about what your taxes can do, what you as a citizen need to do when it comes to tax payments, and also all the issues, as you've mentioned, wrapped around taxation, some of how the African Continental Free Trade Area agreements will affect taxation. Of course, the global OECD taxation policy, we've spoken about that extensively. So these issues that have to do with taxes and what it means for our economy and even for us taxpayers, those are the conversations you can find in this partnership between WATAF and New Central, specifically on Business Edge. So Babatunde, Oladapo, I look forward to seeing you and members of the organization in further episodes of Business Edge. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on the show.
All right.